Welcome to the Environmental Benefits from Nature Tool Deep Dive webinar. What we're going to be doing today is talking you through some of the basics for the tool, giving you an introduction to what it is and where it's come from, aimed at sort of general audience to allow people to get their understanding about where the tool came from, how it works, what it's there to do, who it's for, and then focus on a deeper dive in the second part of the session, getting into more detail on some of the new functionality, which we have improved to be able to address feedback from the previous version, giving examples about how this can help what we're doing and how this can improve your delivery. And in closing with a Q&A session where we'll be taking questions about the tool and also doing a little bit about the polls. So it is going to be a 1 hour session with me, but we'd like to hear a little about you first. So as you can see on the right hand side, we've got some housekeeping information, which I encourage you to look at there, just confirming the microphones are switched off. And this call will be recorded, but below that you'll also see that there are some polls. And really what we're looking to do is get a bit of a feel for the audience here. We've seen fantastic response to the invitation for this call, of almost 500 people signing up, a broad variety of different email addresses. What we'd like you to do is just use some of the polls, entering the information, if you wish to do so, just sharing some broad work areas, the kind of previous experience you might have had with the tool, how you're planning to use the tool, and then also the kind of training, particularly aimed at existing users there, that you think helpful, given the fact that this is a 1 hour session. It's a sophisticated tool. There is a lot going on. We won't be able to address the full needs of all the audiences, but what we can do is take some of these away and provide additional training material, and we'll come to how we do that in a sec. So just starting with the basics here, we're going to go through, it's going to be about sort of 20 minutes, just giving you the background to the tool. This is aimed primarily at new users here, but a useful recap for existing users that might not have touched on the tool recently. We're trying to do this at a relatively high level that's going to be intelligible to planners, policymakers, decision makers that might be on the call, and so pitch towards a general audience. So just giving you some background to the Environmental Benefits from Nature Tool, the EBNT. What it is a voluntary decision support tool to help improve outcomes from development and other land use changes. What this is really about is helping people achieve multifunctional land use. It was created by Natural England, working with the University of Oxford. I think we might have Alison Smith on the call, who's absolutely fantastic in terms of the academic input that was put into the tool. But in addition to that, working across the DEFRA family of input from DEFRA policymakers, from different environmental regulators, from Forestry Commission, an environment agency, working together with Natural England specialists to develop the tool to deliver on the 25-year environment plan commitment to expand net gain approaches currently used for biodiversity to include natural capital approaches, developing and trialing new tools, which is what we have done. The tool itself is designed from the off to be integrated. It's designed to work with Biodiversity Net Gain and the biodiversity metric and green infrastructure standards to enable wider benefits for both people and nature. It's been made available as a beta version, with the original version launched in July 2021, and we've seen a good response. So as a voluntary tool, I think at one point we were seeing 1 in 8 downloads of the statutory biodiversity metric tool. They were downloading the Environmental Benefits from Nature tool. So it's been downloaded over 5,000 times, and a new update is out now. A link to that will be available at the end of the session. So what's it for? So just taking a step back from the slightly technical language we saw before, so thinking about this, and in a word, it's really about the people bit. It's about the fact that, working for Natural England, I've worked for Natural England for 25 years, and people we work with, we believe in the intrinsic value of nature. Nature for nature's sake, incredibly important. Of course it is. But historically, that had been sort of hitting around the sort of 13% mark in terms of its appeal to the populace and the percentage of the population that really agree that this is a priority. So I thought I'd just dip in before the session to look at some of the latest polling from Ipsos Murray, and came across this slide from just before the election, where it was asking people to express, the issues that would decide their vote. And it was amazing to see both where the environment factored in, but also some of the language there. So you could see concern for the environment there coming in at 26%, higher than defence, according to this poll. It is just one poll, but I think it's illustrative. And it's illustrative about the fact that people care about the environment, and that people care about the environment in a way that goes beyond just nature. It's about having a sustainable place and a livable place for them to live, for their future, for their family's future, in a changing climate. And therefore that this wider appreciation of nature has a wider appeal, but can be very tricky to do. So what we've got here with the environmental benefits from nature tool, it's a tool that helps express some of those benefits from nature in terms that people can understand, that responds to their wants and needs, using a language that resonates, and having that consideration where we're making decisions, in a relatively small country about land use change. This is part of the conversation that can help, where this information goes beyond the consideration and feeds into design, can help create and deliver more resilient environments in light of climate change pressures, in terms of allowing and enabling growth and making a positive contribution to the health and well-being of the nation, but then also increasing join up, both starting within project teams, breaking down some of those silos between the work of ecologists and engineers and others within that project process, to be able to get buy-in, starting at project level, but then also going wider. We're seeing positive examples as well about where people are engaging with local communities about the potential consequences of land use change, and starting that wider conversation around wants and needs from particular design. So these are some of the high level benefits, but just from a purely practical point of view, this is about getting more bang for your buck. This is about delivering more from existing work. We've seen Biodiversity Net Gain become mandatory since the beta version of the tool was launched in 2021. We're seeing people have to use the biodiversity. We're seeing this become mainstream. And what this is doing is giving an opportunity through better consideration, particularly where it's done alongside other initiatives, particularly where it's done through join up, through better designs, getting more bang for your buck by including that people bit, to be able to deliver more benefits through creation of habitats, putting the right habitats in the right places to deliver the right services for a place. Benefits like cooling and shading, positive contributions towards flood management, water supply. These are all things which can be embedded through design that can make a positive difference. And where people are doing this already, and I think it's important to align that there are, the broad interest in the tool is that there is appetite to do this, and a lot of people are doing this already. Crucially, it provides a common and consistent means of being able to share, report on the potential outcomes of given design, albeit for a development, and then being able to share that in a way that creates a level playing field, allows like for like comparison between different projects, where the people which are doing that, going that extra mile, can share that in a consistent way. And it's not just us saying that. So we've had a good response. I think that the response has been broadly positive to the tool since it was launched in 2021. And you can see there are case studies, which we'll come to in a sec, which we've written up and been able to share, which illustrate how this has been working in a practical perspective. I think it's fair to say that within the response, we're not fully there yet. There's more work to do, but we're onto something here. We know some of the areas we'd like to make improvement, and we started that process, which we'll come to in the second section of being able to share how we've made improvements to make it easier based on that feedback. In terms of who's it for, it'd be interesting to see whether this is reflected and how this is reflected in polls when we loop back round at the end of the session. But really, this is about anyone trying to deliver multifunctional land use. I think we've seen a lot of use at the moment with sort of progressive projects where they have the resource to be able to do this, working with environmental consultants, which are sort of leading on project design. They're leading on the completion of biodiversity metric tool, and they're completing this tool too. Working on behalf of house builders, in some instances, infrastructure developers. But we're also seeing interest and input from local authorities working on green infrastructure. This might be improvements to existing green space. We've seen NGO interest in terms of using this as a first cut to be able to start a conversation around the potential wider benefits of off-site biodiversity net gain, and for those looking to offer up units, with a wide variety of other uses. We've even had interest from the USA and their EPA interested in what we're doing in this space. So a broad spectrum of interest all the way through from practical users, from decision makers and planners. So benefits to people. Just got an animated slide here. I'm going to try not to sort of get too much into the jargon, but what the tool does is it considers 18 different services that habitats deliver for people. These start with provisioning services, or a bit of jargon there, but the way that we've traditionally thought about land use and the benefits to people. So things you can grow and sell. This might be food, this might be timber, it could even be fish production, historically where we've created lakes, etc. Then the tool takes this next step to including regulating services. These are sort of services that you might have heard discussed at COP recently. These are services that are going to be very important in terms of climate change adaptation. In the light of the changing climate, things like flood management coming to the fore and the contribution that habitats can make to this. Carbon storage, obviously, being a high-profile example. Cooling and shading in an urban environment likely to become ever more important. And then the tool takes an additional step to also include cultural services. Now, cultural services are very, very complex. They're difficult to be able to break down, but they need to be part of that wider conversation because they're incredibly important to people. Cultural services likely to drive our behavior. Our links to sense of place is very, very strong, and you can see that playing out within any planning decision. You've got aesthetic value, which again makes a positive contribution to our daily lives and also will drive our behaviors, all the way through to things like interaction with nature, recreation, that can make a positive contribution to our health and well-being. And we saw this come to the fore during COVID with the importance of green space near where people live, possibly being one of the drivers behind that sort of uptick in terms of concern for the environment and the importance of protecting it. So how it works, just in brief, what you need to do is take habitat information from the biodiversity metric. So in most cases, people coming to the tool would have already done the heavy lifting. They will have this tight habitat baseline, which is linked to biodiversity net gain. They'll have post-development work, which has been articulated within the rules of biodiversity net gain, which gives us a much better degree of confidence in terms of the changes which are taking place. And that can just be copied and pasted and put into the tool. But in order to be able to properly articulate those benefits to people, you need to take on board the context in which this pattern of habitat change is taking place. So you need to collect some contextual information about the site in question in order to be able to get the ecosystem service readout. So what the tool is doing is using a lot of what you've got. It doesn't have to be biodiversity net gain. You might have an existing survey of post-development plans. Outside of that, it works with both, but that's what it does. So most of the work of the tool is just providing that additional site context to be able to get the readout of those 18 different ecosystem services. So in terms of what this looks like, it's an Excel spreadsheet tool like the biodiversity metric. If you've used the biodiversity metric, this will be familiar to you. Left-hand side, that's where you'll copy and paste the information from the biodiversity metric. On the right-hand side, this is where you enter in the contextual information. There are 3 levels in which the contextual information can be entered in, ranging from basic, and I think it's fair to say that that's where a lot of people are at the moment, dipping their toes into the tool. This can be performed using desk-based study largely, through to advanced, which requires information around habitat structure, which in turn requires a degree of field-based assessment. In order to be able to get the output, again, we won't be able to get into the detail here. We could spend a whole hour just talking about this, but the way the tool works in terms of just underneath the hood, it's similar to the biodiversity metric. You've got a weighting system for those 18 different services, 72 habitats, weighted according to their varying contribution that they make to those different 18 services. And this is based around a literature review by the University of Oxford, covering over 700 papers in order to be able to populate this, augmented by the hefty specialist resource which Natural England has, being able to help fill in the evidence gaps to be able to populate this table. And then that intrinsic habitat, that intrinsic value that these habitats have for delivering the different services is then modified by context and condition, as I explained before. So you can imagine population density will have a bearing in terms of the value that an area of green space will be delivering in denser urban environments. Obviously, that green space has potential to be incredibly well used and valuable. For water supply, as we're seeing in the east of England, areas where there is low water supply, positive contributions towards the service are going to be much more important. You can see similar patterns in terms of areas of high flood risk. Positive contributions from habitats will be more important. So this is the kind of information that you need to collect, and this helps modify the scores within the tool and can also help in terms of the interpretation of the results. So broadly, that's how it works. You've got habitats given their value in terms of their ability to deliver services, modified by those contextual factors. It then factors in, like the biodiversity metric, things like time to target condition. If you're planting trees, that can be a fantastic thing to do in the right place, but it will take time for those trees to be able to maximize on their potential. That could take 20 years for them to develop a canopy. That needs to be factored in. You're not going to get the potential gains of gate one. Also, you're not going to be able to deliver all the potential gains hoped for, because there will be an element of delivery risk. If you follow through on that example, not all the saplings that you plant will make it through. That could be particularly true in a changing climate. That is part of the calculation too. Now, a key factor within the tool is the fact that there will be trade-offs. This isn't about trying to create something that looks positive across the board. What we'll find is that for any pattern of land use change, there'll be winners and losers. We want to be clear about articulating that picture to be able to assist with decision making. This isn't about neat net figures. And, just that picture of the camel there, you have to decide what you want, whether it's strength and endurance or whether you want something very fast. You might choose a horse. It's about making the right decision for a particular place, accepting the fact that there inevitably will be some trade-offs and working within that picture of trade-offs to minimize losses and maximize gains. So in order to be able to do that, we've got an output here that presents a picture of change across 18 different ecosystem services over a 30-year time period. So that 30-year time period chosen to match the period of biodiversity net gain. And as you can see here, you can see that picture of change emerging with those trade-offs that I mentioned, with red arrows showing losses, green arrows showing gains, vertical arrows showing big losses, big gains, diagonal arrows showing small losses or gains. And what this is doing is showing the change over time. So returning to that tree example, because it's an easy one to choose, you can see, looking at some of those arrows in this particular example, where trees are part of the mix, you can see within the first year, potentially disruptive in terms of services that are being delivered. But as those habitats establish and become developed, then a more positive picture emerges of that change. So that was something we quite deliberately built into the tool to ensure that those long-term benefits aren't masked within single figures. Now, the tool, as I mentioned before, it's a decision support system. It is not a reporting tool alone. So therefore, it's all very well being able to see this picture of change. But what if services are going down? Is this an issue? If so, what can I do about it? Now, what we want is to be able to provide an integrated system that gives you that information straight away, so it can form part of that broader conversation we're looking to encourage. So if you're seeing decreases to services within the tool, there's an interpretation box on the right-hand side where you can click to expand, and this encourages you to think about the losses within the context of the priorities for the project and where it sits. And then if and only if this is a priority, to look at retaining certain habitats that might have been in place within the baseline that are going to be very important to service delivery, and also suggesting potential positive contributions in terms of habitats that could be put in place if habitats can't be retained to be able to deliver on those improvements. And that forms part of that initial sweep. And then those improvements can also be used to play into to increase multifunctionality to try and maximize those co-benefits when possible. And you can compare options within the tool that allow you to be able to do that. So in terms of sort of the process and where this fits, we encourage people to use the tool early, to use it collaboratively within project teams. It must be used alongside Biodiversity Net Gain, with Biodiversity Net Gain providing the primary driver. Obviously, any tweaks to design, you still need to make sure that you're delivering Biodiversity Net Gain according to the biodiversity metric, but it's designed to be used iteratively at each stage. As you're looking at using the biodiversity metric from feasibility onwards, you can use the EBN tool alongside that where appropriate to be able to look at the potential consequences of services and include that and compare that with local priorities. And it's designed to be worked to used alongside the Green Infrastructure Design Guide. And many of you that have used that will have seen that the Green Infrastructure Design Guide has links to the environmental benefits from nature tool already built in and uses some of that interpretation text as part of the joined up product. But I think it's fair to say, because we're seeing such a wide variety of users, it's not a case of a one-size-fits-all solution. We're very much looking to learn from what works with our existing user community. We'll come to that in a sec. And what works best will be different in different scenarios. As new examples are emerging, we're looking to share these on the environmental benefits from nature page on the Green Infrastructure website. Again, links will follow at the end. Because what we're seeing is within this picture of different uses, it's the stories I think that resonate, that help people fully understand how this works. Because the range of examples is broad, we're seeing fantastic examples emerge from large garden villages where they use the tool early. They've got a combination of different regulatory requirements in addition to biodiversity net gain. Because they've used it early, they've been able to factor this in and make iterative improvements to see positive pictures of gains across the majority of the services. Really good to see, all the way through to small green infrastructure improvements, just use of some local authority lands, putting in a dip for natural flood management, but then using the tool to engage with local communities to find out what they thought about that, what their priorities were, and then being able to feed that into design. So different models for different scales, different uses, looking to share these as we go along, and using the user community to help chart that path forward. Because this was set up as a green infrastructure call, we're just going to close here with a green infrastructure case study. So this is one of the case studies that can be found in more detail on the environmental benefits from nature tool webpage. We're very grateful to the people for Green Gauge Consultancy, if they're on the call. Just like to say thank you for sharing their work with Opportunity Kensington Business Improvement District. For those that know Kensington, land here is an absolute premium, but they're looking to improve green infrastructure there with green infrastructure retrofit. They're looking at the benefits of different ways of being able to do that, again, to get more bang for your buck, to be able to maximize that benefit. Green Gauge came to the tool because it was seen as integrated and consistent. It worked with Biodiversity Net Gain, as we've heard about already, so they can make use of some of the existing investment they've made in terms of completing biodiversity metric. And then its ease of use, the fact that it provides these qualitative outputs within that simple, easy to digest table, starting conversations, as we said we're looking to do, with ecologists, but also social scientists and others within the project team to be able to sort of ground truth the benefits that are being seen, see if these make sense for a place, and make sure you're making the right choices. And then the other reason they chose the tool is the tool has the ability to be able to compare 3 different options within the tool itself without having to create lots of spreadsheets. So you can do that in the tool. That, as you can imagine, would be very useful if you're comparing benefits, and the outputs the tool was providing were useful to them. And that's obviously what counts here. It was showing positive improvements in a variety of different services, which were priorities within the project spec. It's helped support the business case for investment, and broaden the scope from what they would have been able to do previously using existing tools. We're focused on biodiversity to be able to make that wider people-related case to provide a foundation for physical works. And I think that that's what this is all about. This isn't just an academic tool whereby it can start interesting conversations. We want this to lead to physical improvements that have that support and help deliver multifunctional land use to support that GI principle of multifunctionality. So just going to do a very quick recap here, possibly if people just missed the beginning, but just take homes here. Tool is voluntary, it's habitat-based, works with the biodiversity metric. It's been out for a number of years now, seems to be landing well. We've seen a large number of downloads. The outputs cover 18 different ecosystem services that provide a picture of change over time. And what we encourage people to do is use that iteratively to be able to make design improvements to increase multifunctionality, focusing on getting the right gains in the right places to address local priorities. We've seen good support from policymakers to date, and we're seeing people make good use of the common and consistent outputs. But I think it's fair to say that over the last 3 years, we're not there yet, and that's why we've been looking to make improvements to the tool, and that's what we're going to talk through now. So this is the second part where we're looking to really sort of drill down on some of the detail about the positive changes that we've been making to address user feedback. This is going to be aimed at a practitioner audience, but I think it's still going to be intelligible for that wider audience. We're going to share some of the functionality. We're going to share some of the feedback that we've got to date and how this has been addressed. And we're also going to share some of the new additional tools that we've been working on that will help you via the website. So what do you need to know? I think the first one, just before we get into the changes, is just provide some reassurance for those that have used the tool already that you should be getting the same results or very, very similar results from the tool, from the previous version of the tool. What this is about is 3 themes: efficiency and effectiveness. As you'd expect from government, these should always be sort of top priority. So we're looking to lower the bar in terms of the cost of engagement. We're looking to make best use of existing tools and resources to make sure that the ask is practical, but also meaningful. And we're looking to integrate. And I think integration is key. It's about using the existing levers to help be able to deliver more together. And, I put in brackets here, realistic. So we're trying to reduce the ask to make sure it's practical, working with what's going on. So this is realistic because people are busy. But in doing so, we need to also ensure its effectiveness. This isn't about dumbing down or losing some of the detail for good reason. It's about finding new solutions that don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and allow us to be able to deliver more. So we're going to just follow a sort of a common mantra here of you said, we did, just focusing on these 3 themes, starting with efficiency, with a focus here on simplifying the process for accessing data. You said, so following the launch of the tool, we did some evaluation. We worked with different industry leads, using it in different contexts, different scales. And the message we're getting is, we like what you're trying to do here. I think we heard that a lot. But, we have to be realistic that unlike Biodiversity Net Gain, use of the EBNT, it's not a legislative requirement. Policy in this area is relatively new, isn't exceptionally strong. I think that there is a case, and we saw that in terms of, sort of progressive projects, which might be slightly more well-funded. They could play this in, and there's a case to be made. but the resource that will be allocated to this is likely to be limited, and therefore we have to sort of be realistic about how much of an ask you can make here, and that for larger projects, the overhead in terms of collecting all that contextual data really can be quite significant, and that could be a barrier if you're looking to get this tool more widely used. So what do we do? So what we've done is, again, sort of working with that feedback and testing with industry leads, we've developed some new data tools that will help keep the rigor of the existing tool, but reduce some of the bureaucracy, reduce some of the costs, reduce some of the linked guidance, and make it easier to be able to engage with the tool. Two solutions. The first one is aimed at small and simple sites. It's a very light touch, piggybacks on the green infrastructure mapping work, again, feeding through to that integration theme. But then also for those larger, more complicated sites, we've got a GIS solution. So that was something that was felt was needed. This works with open government license data through live service links to be able to do that completion for those more complicated sites where you like to see much more variation, particularly linear infrastructure, making that now feasible. And in doing so, we've been able to greatly reduce a lot of the paperwork, losing the sort of element of treasure hunts, having to go follow detailed advice to go to different government websites to be able to get different data sets, Met Office, Environment Agency magic. It's taken that out of it to make it a much more streamlined project. So in terms of what this looks like, and I think you might have seen this before if you've seen one of the other videos, the green infrastructure, but you take your habitat data from the biodiversity metric, you'll see that there, you zoom in and you can see there's an EBN box now available on the green infrastructure mapping website. What this does is allows you to be able to draw a polygon around your site, and you'll see that it pulls up the data required to complete a basic assessment where that data is open government license, and the headings for those data match the different column headings for the tool. It can then be copied and pasted into the tool to be able to provide those outputs. Conscious that animation went through rather quickly, but the key point there is that you have the data where it's open government license in one place. You've got a custom tool that be able to return that within a search area aimed at small and simple sites. We're not seeing a lot of variation. It is just a site-based search. So it won't give you habitat by habitat if you've got variation, different catchments between fields, etc. But in many cases, we found that for small and simple sites, that works. And that gives you most of what you need to be able to complete the assessment, with a handover then to be able to do some additional qualitative assessments to address landscape, diversity, which we'll come to in a sec. So if we can just get off this slide. Then, in addition to the functionality you've seen for small and simple sites, we now have a QGIS template aimed at larger projects, more technical users, that works with the Biodiversity Net Gain QGIS template. So this is piggybacking on the excellent work of FPCR, which developed for Natural England, the QGIS template for Biodiversity Net Gain. We've learned from that experience. We're using that output, and what we're doing is providing an additional QGIS template, which does the contextual data bit, which provides those live links to the servers, as we mentioned, and then allows you to cookie cut habitat polygon by habitat polygon, the matching contextual data. So what grade of agricultural land is that on? What flood risk zones that on? What's water supply like where that habitat sits? Does it have designations? Is that, you know, so that kind of process, but putting that into an automated workflow that provides the majority of assessment for those larger, more complicated sites. I'm afraid I can't provide an animation for this because it would just be lots of loading bars just passing through them, providing tabular outputs. But just to help you make sense of it, if you haven't used the Biodiversity Net Gain QGIS template, I encourage you to check that out first. But you can see a QGIS output from the Biodiversity Net Gain map on the left-hand side. That is what provides the starting point. So the tool imports that data. Then the contextual data is then fed through to populate the template for your site area within the QGIS tool. And then each of those data layers is cookie cut effectively for those different habitats to provide a tabular output within the tool. And then there's a separate export tool that takes it from QGIS and puts it straight into your environmental benefits from nature tool. So slightly difficult to demonstrate in real time, very powerful, particularly for large projects. So if we've got existing users that have been working on infrastructure, for example, encourage them to check that out, because I think it could be a real game changer. Second point here, very Blairite, integration. You said, and I think this is absolutely right, and I'm sure this will resonate with many of you, there is a lot going on. This needs to, in order to be able to get this to work, we need to work with the statutory biodiversity metrics. So first of all, we've received a lot of feedback saying, when is a new version going to be made available to work with the latest version of the biodiversity metric? Now we have the stable statutory biodiversity metric. We've been able to update the tool, and we've got that link in there with the statutory biodiversity metric list, so you can use that. People have said, we're unclear around, how biodiversity net gain fits in with green infrastructure standards, and service gain. This is a lot going on. How does it all fit together? Oh, and landscape needs to be stronger in here too, because landscape architects are, of course, a key audience. So what do we do? So in addition to be able to update the tool to include the statutory biodiversity metric data and the habitat list, which is a no-brainer, is we've actually integrated green infrastructure standards, starting with UGF, within the environmental benefits from nature tool, for the first time, making clear that relationship between biodiversity net gain, service impact, and then also providing an estimate of urban greening factor. We're also incredibly grateful to Landscape Institute, who we've worked with to be able, in addition to our own specialists, to be able to strengthen the landscape component, with a key addition there being the provision of landscape character assessment database within the tool. So delivering both integration and efficiency through join up to address that feedback. So just starting with the in-tool estimate for urban greening factor, as I mentioned, the integration was starting to happen. We've got the references to the EBN tool within the design guide. You'll see that we've now got the EBN search tool on the green infrastructure website, supporting tool. We've got web page there. We've got it embedded in the mapping. But what we've also done within the tool is embedded a sort of custom conversion table, or Rosetta Stone, if you'd like, which converts, starting with biodiversity. You can start with biodiversity net gain habitats, and via a series of translations, it will convert it to its nearest neighbor surface cover type equivalents. It will suggest caveats where the matches are not exact, but what it does is it automates that translation, converts it to the matching type. Each of those matching type has a score which contributes towards urban greening factor, and then provides that estimate with full transparency in terms of what that looks like. So if we go to the an example here, you can see there's a UGF translation tab, which you'll be able to see within the tool, that explains how that match has been made. Then this is the automated table, where it automates that match, shows how it works, how close the match is, what the matching surface cover type score is, then aggregates it in a similar table to the one used for the Natural England's urban greening factor standard, with those caveats attached, providing an estimate of urban greening factor. You can see on the bottom there, with right hand side, here it's 0.33. And we also, as part of that integration, encourage people to think about urban greening factor. Upfront, the project details, you enter in your target urban greening factor score if applicable, and then that will feed across to an inbuilt message letting you know whether that's been met or not. Won't dwell on this, but also if we've got urban users on the call, we wanted that translation to work two ways. So you can also enter in information within the urban environment before and after, using surface cover type terminology. So a simpler habitat list or a simpler list of land uses that are more applicable to an urban environment, but can then be used to drive the results and provide the outputs which we saw earlier. So that was something else that people asked for in an urban environment. Can we make it simpler than some of those long biodiversity net gain lists? And that's how we've done so. Landscape improvements, I've mentioned, our gratitude there for the work with the Landscape Institute. Landscape, very, very complicated, as we all know, very, very important. Landscape considerations, particularly linked to the scores for aesthetic value and sense of place within the tool, being driven by landscape diversity and local distinctiveness, columns of assessment. Those are the bits of contextual information that drive that. And what we've now got within the tool is the ability to locate those landscape character assessments easily and quickly to act as a guide both for data entry and interpretation as you're going through the tool. So you put in your county, you select the authority from a matching list, and it provides you with that hyperlink. The hyperlink will then take you through to the relevant landscape character assessment, and that is there both to help inform the data entry in the tool, but also as part of that cross-check in terms of making sure that the relevant links have been made, acting as a prompt for further engagement within the project team with landscape architects wherever they have them. I'm now just going to close here with the third sort of strand of the improvements we've made. So this one's linking to decision making and local priorities. I think, again, this is going to be a familiar one for many of you. You said, okay, picture of trade-offs, get it, but it is harder to interpret the results where you've got a mix of trade-offs. It would be okay if everything was going up, but we know that's very difficult. If you get some things going up, some things won't go down. And if things are going down, it can be quite uncomfortable to be able to share this, even though you've done everything you can to try to match priorities. So what we have done here, it's quite simple, but hopefully helps in terms of that narrative there around the efforts that have been made, where we've worked with the existing guidance and advice, but we've changed the display slightly to make it clearer what the priorities, where priorities known, how these have been linked to the results and design to assist with that narrative. So very simply, we've got a few tables there on the project details tab, where you simply enter in whether any of the services in question are a priority within a particular place. I was very interested to see the West of England with their recently launched local nature recovery strategy, again map-based. When you clicked on that, I looked at an example of someone like Chew Valley, and that said, look, we're looking to create habitat in this area. That's the opportunity. The additional benefits being sought are flood regulation and something else I forget, but water quality. And that would then provide that link through, so you can articulate those changes. You can be clear within the tool about where that information came from, and then that can be matched to the highlighted, so that automatically highlights rows within the table to show not everything's going up, but actually the key priorities for this area, as verified by that initial link, have been addressed. We've looked to address that, and then we've looked to maximize co-benefits. So a simple change, but one that can assist people with that narrative. Again, where priority is available, we know that's not always the case. We've also made it easier at the approver end of the spectrum of people that are looking at this, making it much clearer about whether data has been entered consistency, the level at which this has been completed, and for people seeking that level, make it easier to be able to complete the tool and identify where the gaps are. So existing users will see it's now clear what level has been achieved within the EBN and what that's suitable for in the text before you look at the table. And for those looking to complete the table, if there are gaps that have been left as the default NK not known, that'll show as none, but those cells will be highlighted in yellow within the table. And there's a box underneath the main results table that say how many of those cases there are to help you identify them. And again, to drive the activity, to make sure the tool's effective and used properly, where it's helping support decision making. Very quickly, it's keen to leave time for questions. We've also taken on board feedback on training and learning. We know that people's time is precious. The way that people work these days, it's not all about day-long courses. It's like, I've got a particular problem, how do I fix it? If I do that at home, I go onto the internet, I go onto YouTube, I find a video if something's broken, how do I fix it? We're looking to do something similar here with YouTube, providing positive instructions for scenarios to be able to allow people to dip in and just get the information they need to be able to address things that they require as they go through. And the polls on the right hand side will help drive some of the prioritization there. In order to be able to get this to work, we need people to be able to find them. So this is what it looks like. We've got a landing page now for the environmental benefits from nature tool on the green infrastructure website. You can see those YouTube links starting to appear in there. So we've got a short introduction there. That's where you'll find the case studies which I've mentioned, and that's where that additional training will be housed. So just starting to wind up now. As you can see, we've had broad interest in the tool. We're making it easier than ever to engage with. We're looking to broaden the reach for integration, putting it into new hands, bringing in that landscape element that starts to extend beyond ecologists and bringing other members of the project team. We've seen good support to date from government, particularly DEFRA, and hope to sort of continue that journey, working with stakeholders, aligning ever more with green infrastructure standards to match up with and align with new government's priorities to help steer further improvements. In the meantime, we're continuing to work with users to build up that bite-sized training. We know that the tool's landed now, but it'll take time for people to get a head around all the things it can do. Looking to use YouTube training to be able to do that, evaluate the use through feedback, and then where this is working, capture those case studies to sort of help shape and share best practice. So before we go to questions, 3 things to do following this call. Often we have these calls, we think this is interesting, but it doesn't go further. Check out that EBN webpage on Green Infrastructure site, link on the right-hand side. Download the tool from the Access to Evidence website and have a go using that mapping portal for an area you know. See if you can locate your landscape character assessment, see what that says. Think about what potential land use change might mean for a particular place. And then, having dipped into the tool and understood some of those basics, start to think about how this could be used to support your work, where it might fit. And then have a go at using one of the projects. If you're not sure about how to do so, please get in touch. Details at the end, because we'd love to hear from you and hear your case studies. In terms of how to feedback, we have a user survey, which is available on the main Access to Evidence site. So that's the same landing page where you've downloaded the tool from before. That has the detailed instructions in terms of use guidance as to how to complete this, detailed instructions, data catalog in terms of how to go about collecting the data and where to get data from if it's not open government license or covered within the tool. And then also has the principles of use, which we strongly encourage anyone to read first before using the tool in anger. So this is the site. If you scroll down, this is where you'll find the link to feedback, and we've got a shorter survey there, just allowing you to capture both your feedback on the new functionality, your existing needs which have yet to be addressed, and then also opportunity to share your details if you'd like to become part of the user community to share where this goes next. So we've got about sort of 10-15 minutes now to go through with a Q&A, but I think I might move to poll results now.
Andrew, can I intervene? We've had a bit of an issue with some people unable to access the poll. The 1 or 2 people couldn't view any Q&A or view any chat function in their browser. So we might email the polls afterwards, but hopefully maybe we've generated something, but we're quite pressed for time as the other option. So we might just go to the Q&A right now and work on the polls.
I think that's excellent idea. So I think what we do is we can share what we've been able to glean from there. People can feedback online afterwards. So should we move to the Q&A? Because we've got 10 minutes now. I'm sure there's been a variety of different questions coming through. Good to hear from other people on the call. So Polly, if you've been manning the chat, have you got some questions that you can start sharing?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. We've had quite a few questions in the chat around BNG integration issues. So I thought I'd start with one from Lucy Jenkins, who asks, the BNG metric doesn't take into account climate change impacts on current habitat or the need to build in resilience of habitats and ecosystems in the future 30 years. Does this tool address this shortfall in the BNG metric?
So yeah, I think it's fair to say that the biodiversity metric is tightly framed. It's tightly framed around biodiversity. In terms of climate change, as I mentioned before, the tool highlights potential impacts both in terms of mitigation, in terms of impact on carbon storage. It also includes elements of adaptation as well, linked to, as we mentioned earlier, cooling and shading, water supply, flood management. So it considers part of this. It won't consider all the climate change issues, and potentially as well around sort of connectivity of habitats, etc. But it's a voluntary tool that can be used that will extend the reach and go some way towards taking on board those wider climate change adaptations. So again, I'd encourage you to look at the tool, test this out, and feedback how it works. Just conscious of time and try to cover as many of these as possible. Polly, do you have another question?
Yes, we've got one from Stuart Wilson, who says there is an opportunity to support identification of strategic objectives from baseline habitat mapping only. Are you progressing an option without post-development scenario being fixed or provided?
I think the short answer to that is no. I think what we've got here, and as a key point to underline, is we have a set of scales that allows you to compare your before and after. In terms of if you haven't got fully articulated post-intervention work, there is functionality on the project details tab where you can articulate in broad brushstrokes the percentage of different land use changes you might want to build in and what that might look like. So if the question's about you haven't got a full picture of your post-intervention works with Biodiversity Net Gain yet, the set of scales can still be used to be able to consider that, but obviously that would only be appropriate at an early stage. Over to you, Polly. Any more questions?
Great. One from John Meller, who asks, what is the definition of a small and simple site, please?
So small and simple site, within the user guide and within the data catalog, we expand upon this. I think in terms of small and simple site for the tool, what we find is twofold. One, if you draw a polygon using the tool and you're seeing multiple returns for different, so you might be cutting across different catchments, you might have some ancient habitats, some not, you might see different patterns of access, you might see different patterns of designation. That would be a complex site, because what you'd find is some habitats would be designated, some not, some would have different grades of agricultural land, some not, and therefore the site-based search would be less relevant because you've got variation within the site. Whereas if you're drawing a polygon and what you're finding is that everything within there is in the same catchments, none of it's designated, then you'll find that the tool works well. Within the guidance within the tool, we tend to say for a basic assessment that should be used early on sites that don't have any semi-natural habitat. I think what we're calling small and simple sites here is slightly different in that if you're not seeing any variation, if it's consistent across the whole site, the tool should work for you. And I think that will be very apparent when you use it. You'll zoom in, you'll draw around there, and you'll see if there are multiple returns, and those are actually highlighted in red with some guidance built into the tool to do that. So again, encourage you to have a look at that, play with the tool and see if you're getting singular results. If the results are the same across the whole site, that should still work for you. If not, we'd encourage you to go down that QGIS route.
Thanks, Andrew. You've probably got time for a couple more questions.
Yep.
So
Fantastic.
One from Ruth Rolls, who asks, are local wildlife sites included in the designated sites? If not, does it say as these should be picked up on planning, not available on DEFRA Magic?
Yes. Short answer is no. They're not included in there because they're not open government license. Are they included within the consideration of the tool? Yes. So within the So if you go to the data catalog, this is listed as one of the data sets which you could seek to include. So the tool counts the number of designations in place. Local wildlife sites count as one of those designations. And if you look on the QGIS template user guide, there's actually a worked example about how, if you have that additional mapped data available to you, that can be manually entered in to augment the open government license data to be able to get those results. So what we've tried to do is make best use of open data to get you to a point, but then the data catalog can provide further instruction about how you can augment that with additional data. But obviously we can only work with what's open government license data at the moment. So hope that helps. Polly, any more?
Great. Yeah, a question from Dermot Carr around training.
Yep.
Would love to see a workshop demo of the QGIS template, seeing that it isn't included today. Is that something you could deliver?
Yeah, I think that very much fits within that bite-sized training. So what we're looking to do is be able to provide a sort of consistent format of YouTube training everywhere through from a quick start. I come into this new, I want to get my head around it, through to deep dives around finding out the transparency so you can see what's behind the numbers there, and you can dig deeper if you need to, through to how to use that site aimed at small and simple sites. And again, we can respond to feedback about how we define that, through to the QGIS template. So I think that's very much on the list of things to do. As ever, driven by priorities. That's why we're looking for the polls and user feedback to focus our attention on the biggest hitting items first. But yes, very much in scope. Couple more minutes, couple more questions, Polly?
Yeah, sounds good. One from Howard Stevens. Will the tool work for developed, devolved regions, i.e. Wales?
Oh, this has come up before. I think what you might find is, in parts, I think sometimes the data where you've got data sets that go beyond England, or work where you've got England only data sets, you'll use some of these tools, you'll draw a polygon and you'll find that it's not returning anything because that data is not there. I'd encourage you in Wales to talk to colleagues at Nature Scot in Scotland. So they've been looking at this and looking at how the tool could be applied or how it could be modified within the devolved agenda. So I think, yeah, follow up offline on that one. But in principle, this is something that could be expanded relatively easy to work in that way. But again, you'd need that biodiversity net gain starting point. Any more questions, Polly?
Right, final question. Can BNG and wider benefits both be designed at the earliest stage?
This is covered in part within the updated user guide for the tool that sort of provides breakdown using the broad stages that relate to biodiversity net gain within the BNG standard. What you'll find, like biodiversity net gain, is at a very early stage, you might be slightly data poor. You might have to rely on assumptions in terms of being able to populate part of this. If you have that habitat information, which is going to be the key bit at the starting point, and you know where the location is, we've made it much easier to be able to collect that contextual information for a place. You might have some gaps, you might not be able to achieve a full result, but I think having the output there that shows you the potential impact, and then starting that very early conversation around what the priorities might be, linked to local plan, green infrastructure strategies, LNRS, etc., for a particular place, I think is very useful. So by hopefully lowering the bar of engagement, it makes it much easier for people to do that. But I'd say you need to rely on some assumptions. Any other questions? And just to confirm, Polly, in terms of just winding up now, so we're probably looking at the time, probably need to wind up. We've got the links in the chat to be able to find out more. If you've got particularly large initiatives, or you'd like to have a more in-depth conversation about the tool, please get in contact with us at ebn@naturalengland.org. naturalengland.org.uk. And I'd encourage you all to go away, have a look at it and feedback. So just going to end on those three asks. Go to the EBN page, or go to the green infrastructure page, find so it's on the second drop down, find the environmental benefits from nature page, and then go play with the tool, look at those case studies, see how it's working, think about how it works for you, and then feedback using that feedback form. If you also got some pressing needs, please, again, for training, get in contact with EBN and naturalengland.org.uk, and we can augment that poll to be able to drive our priorities going forward. So I think we'll end it there. I'd just like to say thank you ever so much to all those that have contributed to the evolution of the tool. It's been a fantastic project to be involved in. We've had a lot of input. There's a lot of positivity within the community that we're looking to harness. And yeah, just like to pass on our thanks and hopefully grow the group to collect ever more feedback to take this forward. Thank you very much.